What is the U.S. Department of the Navy doing to field weapons systems and platforms that give it a technological edge over its adversaries? How has the Navy's acquisition strategy evolved in recent years to better meet the needs of modern warfare and technological advances? And what is the U.S. Navy doing to modernize its fleet assets and ensure sailors and Marines have the resources they need to maintain high levels of operational readiness? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Vice Admiral Frank Morley, Principal Military Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Admiral, given your duties, what are the most significant challenges you face in your position, and how have you sought to address those challenges?
Yeah, and I guess one thing first I'll mention too, so just to understand a little bit more of the organization. So
Sure.
The organization has under it and direct reports to all the PEOs, so in our case, about 16, I think it's 16 now, 16 PEOs and 2 direct report program managers, which are flag officers running very large programs, all are direct report into this office. So when you hear PEOs and all the programs under it, then it all culminates here within RDA. On to your next question there regarding kind of the challenges. So, boy, where to start, right? So there are challenges everywhere you look, but I'll, a couple of big ones for you there. Certainly, there's an industrial-based challenge. If you think about it through any adult in the working world today within defense, their entire professional lives has been really in an environment of a constricting defense industrial base. And, because we all basically grew up in a post-Cold War environment where we had no existential threat and we were taking risk and the peace benefit or what have you from there. So in general, the industrial base had been constricting, globalization was pretty wide, and things became very efficient. Of course, we're not in that world anymore, and probably about 6-7 years ago, it kind of shifted, maybe 8 now, where, it wasn't overnight, but you could kind of feel the pendulum shift as we recognized that we were no longer in that environment and that we were more in, what we termed at the time a near peer competitor, and we needed to, and we were in a much more competitive environment. And so that started us on a road to do things a little differently, to think, act, and operate differently. So, but one of those is the industrial base, and we'll talk probably more about it later, but just in a broad stroke, recognize that as we try to ramp up submarine production or we try to ramp up munitions production, there are long lead times for that. There are market forces in play. There are steady investments that need to be made in order to set the business case. And there's supply chains down to the 3rd, 4th, 5th tier suppliers that need to be made healthy. So that is a big challenge, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit more. I'll give you another one too, which is I would call the tech insertion opportunity. So we are in an environment where there's a lot of, obviously, the rapid rise of technical development and technical opportunity, increases exponentially every day, given heavy software bases. And a lot of this tech can solve some very key operational problems. So our ability to increase our rate to be able to utilize that tech, which much of it exists in the commercial space, and insert it into a way to deploy operationally is driving us to do things differently, and we may get into that. And then a third one I would tell you would be really trying to bend the curve of the cost and the time to develop anything. And so I would tell you that the world in general, not just the Department of Defense, but those who develop complex things have been the victim of the increasing complexity of the items we're asked to develop, and really the tool set utilized to do that not keeping pace. So in other words, The systems engineering process that we all learned and utilize today in some way, shape, or form was really came about in ballistic missile development back in the 50s when we got into complicated systems that were too expensive to build, test, fail, and fix. And so we needed to trace through the requirements and find some of the failure modes before we ever built and tested. That has served us well through the mechanical age of complexity. But as we've moved into highly software-driven entities and machines that have millions of lines of code that need to work with other millions of lines of code, you can't possibly trace all those. So that tool set is somewhat stretched. But today we see that there are tools that are maturing mostly in the form of model-based systems engineering, digital design, digital manufacturing, model-based testing and evaluation. These type of tools are now mature enough where you see the opportunity to shorten the timeline for that development and build a much better understood and much more mature machine, which should shorten the test and discovery. So those are three areas that I would tell you. Long answer, I know, but the industrial base expansion, the tech insertion, and then bending the curve of cost and development time.
Admiral, how has the Navy's acquisition strategy evolved in recent years to better meet the needs of modern warfare and technological advancement? And perhaps you could highlight some of your strategic priorities for us.
Yeah, so let's see. So certainly when you hear the CNO talk, we've maintained, CNO Franchetti has been very clear about, hey, I being the CNO are part of a continuum, and so recognizes that she needs to build on the CNO Guild A prior to her and hand off to the next CNO on there, and not make, the Navy is no pun intended, a large ship, and so you don't make rapid course corrections there if you're going to actually make way. So you've seen a consistency from the Navy in the standpoint that there's a recognition that in today's world we think we need to get bigger on that, and it's really about a vector and not an argument about exactly how many ships. It's just the vector seems to be pretty clear from multiple studies. But you also see the priorities, generally speaking, have been from an acquisition standpoint in terms of first and foremost, reconstituting our nuclear deterrent, mainly in the form of Columbia, but there are a few other aspects to that. Then we talk readiness. The CNO talks about getting more ready players on the field, and the easiest, quickest way to do that is to get the players that you currently have built back on the field, or a higher percentage of them. So a big focus on the readiness of our fleet. And then we get into the capability development and the capacity pieces as well. So it's not a either or, it becomes a blend and a priority, which is part of each and every budget cycle. But that stayed pretty consistent for several years now from the Navy's efforts there. Along with that, certainly we can talk about that tech insertion piece. A lot of effort going on there. We can get into that in a little more detail, but doing things differently in order to take advantage of this emerging tech that's in the commercial market and getting it into an operational application quicker. And oftentimes that comes in the form of unmanned type of systems. And so you see a move towards a more and more hybrid fleet, whether in the air or at sea.
Admiral, can you tell us more about the Maritime Economic Deterrence Executive Council? What economic threats does the council focus on specifically, and how does it work to mitigate those threats?
Yeah, so that's, this is an enduring challenge, right, in this world. We see it within the military, we see it commercially, all that, and we're an open economy. And so we certainly have certain vulnerabilities that other nations may not have because we're very, very open, and that's been very successful for us overall. But we have to be mindful of that. So it's nothing new. It's an enduring concern and threat there. And what Secretary Del Toro, recognized was that, hey, we've got, one, we probably need to up our game on this, and really as a nation. So this is economic deterrence is ultimately a national effort. But hey, you got to start at home and do what you can within where you can control, and then drive the discussion higher. So what we recognized was that hey, we have a lot of singular efforts within the service that are doing this. Whether there's something called CFIUS, which I won't remember the full acronym on, but basically it looks at foreign ownership of companies, or when a company's going to sell to a foreign company or whatever, we look at the economic, the implications of that to our supply base, and that we can step in as a government if that becomes an issue. So there's that effort. That's an established effort. Certainly, there are S&T efforts to try to protect our S&T and research, our science and technology and our research and development. And there are other types of efforts that we have in order to try to protect the stuff that goes on, counterfeit parts, these type of things, cyber threats, etc. So what we did here within the Navy is, in order to kind of up our game a little bit, we put an overall umbrella and kind of collected. I'll add to that infrastructure, critical infrastructure protection, et cetera. So we kind of casted a wide umbrella under the Maritime Economic Deterrence, moniker, and brought those groups together with leadership here in the department to try to synergize. Try to elevate certain areas that have great promise, and really just kind of up our game there. So that's kind of the initial vision of it. We're also connecting. As you do that and you gain attention, you start finding other entities out there that are looking at this. So we found that the Air Force has a research effort that looks at where those threats are. And we found that INDOPACOM has something similar. And so now we're working hand in hand with them as they help identify potential threats to us, and we can potentially make solutions. And then the Secretary's view here is, look, we up our game, we start trying to take care of our business, and then that gives us the opportunity to drive the discussion higher up in government. And so, you saw that in the defense industrial based strategy, economic deterrence was a big part of that from this growing dialogue that's occurring.
Very interesting mission for the council. I want to switch from those economic threats to the acquisition process as a whole. And improving the efficiency and effectiveness of acquisition is critical. What are some of the biggest challenges you face in the acquisition process, and how is the Navy streamlining and enhancing its acquisition processes?
Yeah, so I would tell you, obviously, truth in advertising, I am a product of the system. And so you always have to, kind of remind yourself of that. On the other hand, I've been a successful navigator of that system there. I would tell you, first off, I don't get too tied up about the process too much. Ellen Lord as ANS, I think did a really good job in changing the 5002, made multiple acquisition pathways, and so really provided a opportunity for program managers to tailor, what they're bringing along, and not try to follow a single script. And that's really what her predecessors had really been talking about as well. And whether it was Secretary Kendall or Ash Carter prior as senior acquisition executives for the department, they had all been talking about, you need to be flexible. You need to understand what the needs are. You need to think. Don't just follow. And so this has been a consistent, message for a while. And then I think Ellen Lord and her group did a nice job putting that down on paper. So, quite honestly, there hasn't been a lot of, we've actually gone through 3-4 years here without anybody rewriting that. So that's pretty good. So I think that's a big part of it is we've got the flexibility, and you've got to teach people to use it and utilize that. So that's a general answer on that. Obviously, as an operator within the system, it becomes an art form as much as it is a science in understanding what's important and how to move things through the system rapidly, right? And then there are efforts ongoing to provide us ways to do things more rapid. As an example, mid-tier acquisition, right, was created, which was a way to, within 5 years to try to bring either a prototyping of something or actually field something and take away some of the requirements. So in other words, we limit the risk to the department and the taxpayer dollars by certain, we're not going to build the Columbia submarine under this moniker, but, certain things under certain dollar amounts with certain technical risk can apply in this category. We'll relieve some of the checks and balances here to allow you to go a little faster, and we'll see what happens. So, probably mixed success on that, but that's the thinking is right on that. And then the biggest thing you see going on gets back to the, as far as doing things differently, gets back to the earlier discussion on tech insertion. And so the model that I would tell you the Department of Defense has kind of settled on right now, and this wasn't necessarily a scripted plan, but it's kind of what we've stumbled upon as working with the current conditions in this area, which is what I would call, you see a series of bridging organizations created. Each service has one or two, and OSD has a couple. So, AFWorks in the Air Force, DCO now in the Navy, the DIU was one for OSD, and then Replicator is not really a bridging organization as it is an accelerant at the end of that. But these are organizations that, given the conditions that exist today, where rapid rise in tech advancement, the fact that much of that critical tech advancements in the commercial space, and that this kind of tech is actually solving key operational problems and is not overly expensive. These are not necessarily large capital expenses, again, oftentimes in the form of something unmanned and something relatively cheap, has allowed for a non-traditional defense suppliers to pop up, to have more competition. And so these bridging organizations have been formed in order to really address a seam in our normal structure. And these organizations and their leaders are accountable to understand key operational problems that need a solution, to find a matching tech solution to that of something that's relatively mature today and isn't going to undergo, multi-year development maturation process, and then get that thing, whether it's commercial or within a government lab, get that thing into something that's deployable in the operator's hands in a relatively rapid fashion, like inside a budget cycle type of thing. And so that's what you see a lot of these organizations trying to do. They're different. They're approaching it differently. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but that's kind of the model we settled on. And because of the conditions of the environment and what is actually helping to solve certain key operational problems, it's allowing us to think, act, and operate a little differently and try to teach ourselves something. So that doesn't apply to everything, of course, but it does apply to a certain area.
Admiral Morley, there's a lot of focus on artificial intelligence, hypersonics, and as we talked earlier, autonomous systems in recent years. How is the Navy integrating these emerging technologies into its operations? And what are some of the challenges and opportunities associated with this integration?
Yeah, well, we have, of course, we have these wonderful platforms called ships that have a space and power and size. Of course, they all have their limitations in space, weight, power, but nonetheless, perhaps easier than a fighter jet in incorporating new large hardware type technologies there. So that stuff goes on all the time. We're arming up our LCS ships with some of our newer missile systems to provide a lethality aspect to that wasn't originally planned. So hypersonics is obviously one that's talked about a lot. Again, that has to come again with the large ranges that we're going to have to be dealing with, and getting mass on a target in a quick manner. So those technologies are in development, and certainly we have the platforms targeted on where those would go into. Other areas that are certainly of high interest when you think of high energy alternatives to kinetic defenses, laser and microwave. As an example, these things have great promise. We still have a physics problem in the fact that generating enough power, even off a ship, to get the range that we want is still a bit of a challenge. But we've got prototype laser on ships today, laser defense system, and we are in the midst of installing a prototype microwave system on a ship today as well. To understand that, we want to continue to develop that technology so we can get the power out to where we get ranges beyond just terminal last ditch defense, right? We want to be able to utilize these non-kinetic systems at a longer range to where we still have a kinetic option if it doesn't work, right?
So, Admiral, as you look forward to the future, what are your hopes for the Navy's technological capabilities in the next decade?
Yeah, boy. Let's see. So, from a technological side of the house, I think that certainly we're going to see more of that hybrid fleet of that manned, unmanned teaming there. You're going to see that emerging over the next decade in all aspects, air, sea, and undersea there. So that we're going to see quite a bit of. These high energy, non-kinetic solutions we'll start seeing come in more and more of. And I think that's going to be important from a standpoint of, having more flexibility in the defense of our systems there and better cost exchanges when those occur. So a lot of effort on there. Certainly you're going to see more ability to put fires at range, whether that's through long range weapons, hypersonic weapons, et cetera. And so that's going to be a big area. And then I think, more mass in general, more munition stocks, more sensors through unmanned, more axes of potential threat to a potential adversary through unmanned and other things. And so I think you're going to see a lot of that as well here over the next decade.
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Vice Admiral Frank Morley, Principal Military Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.